People want to sit there and try to tell me that, there's a good economy. Meanwhile, we got $22 trillion in debt. How do you go $22 trillion in debt? Are we going to declare bankruptcy soon? I mean, we just keep on borrowing, taking more money for all these right-wing Republican projects. We got a president that only thinks that only Republicans deserve any protection or any. He hasn't done anything for the Democrats. He hasn't reached out whatsoever. He's not leading the United States of America. He's leading the Republican United States of America. And that's, I guess that just shows you Obama reached out to the Republicans. They were pieces of shit, and they're still pieces of shit. So just, we're just always supposed to be pieces of shit. Is that the lesson? So we got $22 trillion in debt. There's 40 million poor and 500,000 homeless. 320, million people. So it seems like a lot of people are doing okay. A lot of people are doing pretty decent. And so you would think if people are doing good and their cup is running over and they got too much food and they got too much money, they got too much free time, you would think they would say, you know what, that family with the kids that's sleeping out in the cold, maybe we as a society should do something about it. Nah, that kid should get a job. Who cares about that kid's life? But I'm glad I made those parents have those babies when they weren't ready for them. Because I'm pro-life, right? So you have 40 million poor, so that's a substantial amount, but most people are doing fine, so, and they don't vote, right, so you probably could ignore their problems, the homeless people's problems, until they go, until they lose their minds, and I feel like, wouldn't they be justified a little bit? A homeless person just loses their minds, and it's like, oh, well, yeah, he was homeless. People throw change at him, yell at him, tell him get a job. He's all dirty. Just needs to get a shower. His entire life is exposed in front of everybody, and people just hide behind their windows and just snicker. Yeah, that makes sense. Yep. Yeah, him going crazy was correct. And then $22 trillion in debt. So, they'll brag about the unemployment rate, the GDP, and then the GDP in Wall Street. So Wall Street, they're doing great, right? GDP, they're doing great. The thing is that was, those were doing great under Obama, and now they're, still doing great. So we're just, we just keep getting better when it comes to Wall Street, right? Wall Street, anyways, $22 trillion in debt, 40 million people are poor. Ask the poor people, hey, how's your economy? Oh, well, I see everybody's doing great. So, my economy is everyone's economy, so it's great. No, they're doing bad. So 40 million people have a bad economy, and 500,000 homeless people have a bad economy. $22 trillion in debt means our entire economy is based upon borrowing trillions of dollars, and it just keeps climbing, keeps going up. I thought we were going to try to pay down this debt. I thought we were going to try to, isn't that what the Republicans are good at? Saving money, not spending, not putting people in debt. $22 trillion. Donald Trump's spending money on something. I don't see nothing. He's spending money on something, though. So this is about Joe Biden and his, I look way too much into this, but the 1994 crime bill. So is Joe Biden guilty or not guilty? My verdict is he's guilty. He's tied to the 1994 crime bill. It was a violent crime bill, so everything that they put in, it's kind of a genius bill, because who could be against, wanting to stop crime? So they could have shoved everything that they wanted to in this crime bill. They could have, criminal justice reform. They could have made sure the police, they're supposed to be the examples. So if they're being violent pieces of shit, then, that's just saying this is how we do things around here. And so, okay, being a violent piece of shit is proper and right. So I think some criminal justice reform things could have been put in there. The war on drugs could have been ended. So what would it take to reduce violent crime? So take all the violent crimes and increase their sentences. Take all the petty crimes, reduce their sentences. So the crime bill, right? You want less crime. There's violent crime. It was on the rise, and ultimately, if I was Joe Biden, I would be doing the same thing as him. But I'm not Joe Biden, so, old Grandpa Grope and Sniff. So old Grandpa Grope and Sniff just keeps on saying something stupid every day, so that's exactly what we got in the White House right now. Hey, you said something stupid. Fantastic. When Mills give you ear cancer, they give you ear cancer? Okay. That was, good old Prez. But he passed the crime bill, and if you're in government, you want to pass bills, right? You got something done, and there's a lot of elements to the crime bill. There's about a dozen different elements, and he disagreed with the 3 strikes rule, but it, was a part of the bill. So if you voted for a bill and you liked the majority of it, but not all of it, well, you got to explain yourself. You got to say, here's what here's where I stand on this bill, and then here was the thing that I was against. And so he broke it down. So that's why I'm looking so far into this, because he broke it down so much. It was actually an awesome history lesson. So maybe that's the, purpose of Joe Biden, to give us a history lesson. Here's, how they've been fucking up for decades, and so let's not do this. So when it comes to the 1994 crime bill, he looked at the whole thing. He says, I'm going to vote for it. He was against the 3 strikes, you're out law, which that's a law, right? So 3 violent crimes, even if they were drunken brawls at Yellowstone, and that was his concern. He wasn't, he was concerned about the 3 strikes, you're out law, getting people with low-level violent crimes. So he says, a rapist, yeah, you rape 3 times, you go to jail forever. But if you are just in a fist fight at Yellowstone National Park, you're drunk and, you get into a fight, then that's technically a violent, a violent crime on federal land. So therefore, you're going to go to jail for, life too. No questions asked. 3 strikes, you're out. 3 violent crimes, you're in jail for life. And so the crime bill had all these different elements, and to think that it wouldn't do anything, a lot of these bills, sometimes that's all it is just to help the culture, because they can't force the states to adopt them, so they could tie some money to it and make it an incentive program. And they did that with the prisons. They spent $6 billion, $10 billion, $6 to $10 billion. I want to say $10 billion was the final bill, but he was trying to make it just $6 billion. But he was in favor of prisons, but not in favor of prisons as much as the Republicans wanted the prisons. So you had several bad things. Okay, so there were 60 more crimes that was tied to the death penalty. The juveniles are tried as adults for violent and gun-related crimes. And, what about corporal punishment? You want to stop the youth from being violent? Why don't you protect them from violence, you fucking hypocritical pieces of shit? Yeah, you can put violence upon them, but then act appalled if they were to put violence upon you. They did what we've been doing to it. So juveniles, if you're like 8 years old, I don't, hurrying up and just making juveniles crimes. Violent and gun-related crimes are, usually really bad crimes. So, I'm somewhat partial. I can see it both ways. 60 more crimes tied to the death penalty. I didn't even realize the federal government was putting people to death. The Rosenbergs, for treason, I guess they put the Rosenbergs to death. So there's a lot of things to the crime bill, things I don't like. Some things I do like. The drug courts. I thought the drug courts was a good step in the right direction. We should end the war on drugs. But the drug courts just would divert people. Instead of giving a criminal charge, and they would go to a drug court. And so the drug courts I liked, and there's a couple of other things. So overall, I just want to say my overall verdict and then get into the nitty-gritty. He voted for the 1994 crime bill. He wrote the thing. He is part of the Senate Judiciary Committee. So he wrote the crime bill. He pushed the crime bill, told everyone to go vote for the crime bill. So his name is all over the crime bill. Now, if I was him, so essentially the crime bill did cut crime in half in America, but it also threw a lot of people in prison. So this massive incarceration, a lot of the racist, standards. So we have more people in prison than per capita than every country in the world, including China. China with all those horrible human rights abuses. Meanwhile, we're packing our prisons, more than China is. So what's happened, with the mass incarceration? To think that a crime bill, a violent crime bill where they get tough on crime, of course that's going to put more people in prison. And in some respects, you kind of need a prison, right, as a last resort. But if someone's wild and out of control, you have to, throw them behind bars. So the fact that he supported prisons, I think that's, the wrong emphasis. But really, I think if they would have expanded it, got rid of child abuse, if they would have got rid of, the war on drugs, if they would have regulated the police so the police aren't just being violent criminals. So again, right, they can be violent, but no one else can. So that's, they could have made the crime bill so much better. They could have made it better, and the elements that he supported are the elements that rose the prison rates. So what he's going to have to do is he's going to have to essentially defend himself. What I'm going to do is I'm going to say, no, Joe, you suck. So the crime bill is passed. It wasn't as sinister and as bad as, you know, I had originally thought of it as, but it's definitely a Republican thing. The Clintons went ahead and did welfare reform. They did the crime bill. They passed NAFTA, so free trade and, you know, cutting people off of welfare, getting tough on crime. That's typically, you know, those are their signature policies. So they have to defend it, and it's not a bad idea to have passed a bill to have stopped violent crime. Yeah, we passed a bill because we wanted to stop violent crime, and we cut violent crime in America in half. And so, you know, the proof is in the pudding. So it did work. It was effective. And, you know, you just need prison reform or a criminal justice reform bill like what Cory Booker has. So Joe Biden lies about this, right? So even though he is for some of the crappy things, the biggest thing when it comes to the incarceration is whether or not he was in favor of the prisons. Oh, he says he was for rehab centers. He wasn't for prisons. That's a lie. He was in favor of it when it was $6 billion for prisons, and then the final bill was $10 billion. So he said that he was opposed to that increase of, you know, the $4 billion. That's where he was opposed to more prisons. So $6 billion is being spent, right, for more prisons, and then the way that they did this, how, you know, what states are going to benefit. Not all the states benefited from this, so they went ahead and they passed $10 billion for the prisons to be built, and the way your state would win is if you had truth in sentencing laws, meaning that you made every person that was convicted serve 85% of their sentence. So if you're making them serve 85% of their sentence, then your state qualified for the prison, you wrote out a grant, and then maybe you would get part of that $10 billion. So he did pass it. The $10 billion was a part of it, so was the three-strike rule, so he could criticize parts of it, but overall, he says this was a good thing. He looked at all the elements. He didn't like the, you know, a few of them, but overall, he liked the whole bill. And there's some other things. Community policing, that's a good thing. Drug courts, that's a good thing. The mandatory minimums, the first-time offenders, they got rid of mandatory minimums for the first-time offenders. That's, you know, obviously a good thing, right? Well, this is your first time here? Well, 5 years, mandatory minimum. That's insane. That's crazy. So that's kind of, those are really good things, and they're obvious. The Republicans are going to attack community policing because they're saying, what? The police get out and about, you know, out and about amongst the people? What are they going to do? Organize a bunch of midnight basketball leagues? What are they going to do? Teaching us dance lessons? Oh, man. Yeah, that's precisely what, you know what I mean? Like, be out amongst the people, and then how are we supposed to behave? How are we supposed to act? We're just supposed to, you know, pull guns on each other and beat the crap out of each other? If that's what, you know, the police serve as the example, that's what it seems like to me, right? Just be crappy, be authoritarian, just always get in people's business, and then bully people, right? Don't even bully the guilty people. Bully the weak people, and then, you know, bully them until you make them feel like they did something wrong. And, you know, so, he, you know, supported the crime bill. He supported the crime bill, liked most of it, pushed it, wrote it, so his name is all over it. He is responsible for the massive incarceration rates. Of course he would be, but he would just say, well, compare and contrast, I cut crime, you know, violent crime in half. So he did a lot of things, and so now we just got to work on this other, you know, problem that was created. So, you know, I'm going to go, you know, I can see his perspective. I see what he's doing. He should defend it, right? Support parts of it, criticize parts of it. Passing a violent crime bill is historic. When it comes to passing these bills, like every 10 years, I want to see an education bill. I want to see a climate change bill. I want to see an immigration bill, a health care bill, a peace bill, community policing bill, democracy bill, and a crime bill. So I want to see these things every 10 years. Every 10 years, we're looking at all these laws, and we're saying we're going to, you know, update every single one of them. So that's, you know, when it comes to legislative, passing these bills are the big thing. You know, the crime bill is one of 3 major policies that the Clinton administration did. So the U.S. could easily pass another violent crime bill in 2019, 2020. Who doesn't support being tough on crime? Well, actually, Mitch McConnell didn't support being tough on crime. He's never had a crime bill. He was opposed to the crime bill, the Clintons, because it's a Democrat that's doing it. So again, Republicans just being pieces of shit. What, you don't support crime? Well, he wants to, sink America so the Republican Party always has power and, playing politics. Even though he would be, you would think, tough on crime, it was a Democrat doing it, so, fuck that guy. So I like the drug courts because they were, pushing off to the side. They would go after actual criminals, and if there was no actual, violence or it was just a petty possession charge. So they try to divert drug charges into drug courts, which is a good step towards the end of the war on drugs. But ending the war on drugs, how much violence is associated with the war on drugs? You got all the violence in the cartels in Mexico is totally because of the war on drugs. You have lots of people making millions of dollars, lots of Al Capones and all these criminals making lots of money off the war on drugs because they're willing to sell. The demand is high. It's illegal, so therefore they can make bank. So God, man, the war on drugs is just... And then the only thing that was dangerous for marijuana was that it was illegal. So because the state would come down for petty possession, then, people with marijuana, they could rob, they could cheat, they could fuck each other over, because what are they going to do? Call the police? So it's being self-regulated. The biggest thing was that it was illegal, whereas, marijuana by itself, who's it hurting? You're, allowed to hurt yourself if you actually think that's hurting you. And so, yeah, Jesus Christ. When it comes to the war on drugs and violence, the violence is the state violence is the part that increases all the other violence. So if you legalized it, we're free Americans, right? We believe in freedom, so put it right next to the police, sell it in moderation, but you put out all the damn, criminals by legalizing it, selling it, publicly. You get rid of all the damn criminals so that people can get their drugs. There's no criminal element to it, so there's nothing shady. People are actually treating each other the way they're supposed to be treating each other. So ending the war on drugs, reforming the police, and then child abuse. These are, I think these are things that they could have focused on. But they didn't. So, okay, the bill did increase massive incarceration. He's guilty of that. He's guilty of being, the prime author of the damn thing. So he wrote it, and so he could just say it's a mixed bag. Yeah, I did good. I cut violent crime, but yeah, I guess we did put more people in prison. So, what do we got to do now? Okay. So there was a stop violence against women part. I agree with that. The community policing part, I was in favor of that. And he lied. He said he wasn't doing the prison thing, but he was doing the prison. And when they tied the $10 billion to the truth in sentencing laws, you had about 11 states that jumped on board and made their laws more difficult. So there were 16 states that had truth in their sentencing laws. And then once the crime bills passed, 11 more states had truth in sentencing laws, so they could get this, the prison money. So essentially it encouraged 11 more states to have everybody, no more parole, right? So you get convicted of 5 years, you serve, 4.5 years of that. You can't parole out for good behavior. You can't do probation. You can't do a divergent program. You got convicted, you got to serve. And then that's when you would get the prison. Joe Biden did that. Joe Biden tied that together. So it wasn't just giving prisons to people that needed prisons. It was giving prisons to the states that had essentially fascist laws. So he encouraged fascism. He encouraged people to, make things worse for others. Now I'm going to get into the specific details of this thing. So the good things, the violent crime is cut in half, right? Dance lessons, midnight basketball, that's what Mitch McConnell is going to make fun of. Those are the good things. Community policing, these are good things. The Violence Against Women Act had 4 things, part of it. Increased federal penalties for repeat sex offenders and provided grants for victim services, among other measures. Both of those are good. They tucked the assault weapons ban in the Violence Against Women Act. So it made it look like, what, you want violence against women? No, I just don't want the assault weapon to be banned. And assault weapons, are they just attacking women? They're attacking men too. Probably more men are getting killed with assault weapons than women. So I think that's a little disingenuous, right? Well, do you support the Violence Against Women Act? So they tucked this Violence Against Women Act inside the Crime Bill of '94, and the grants are good. The increased penalties for the repeat sex offenders are good. So there's two good parts about it. I'm pro Second Amendment. So the gun control, they wanted funding for the Brady bill, which was a 3-day waiting period. So they tuck this in the Violence Against Women Act. So I'm against the assault weapons ban and the funding for the Brady Handgun Violence Prevention Act, and a ban on some semi-automatic weapons that was in place for 10 years. So those aspects of Violence Against Women Act I was opposed to. It really isn't even, I shouldn't even say that's a part of that, because they're not even related whatsoever. So the drug courts I like, the funding for the community-oriented policing services, that actually put tens of thousands of additional police officers on the streets. So the Republicans were opposed to having good police officers that were, preventive and actually got out and about with folks instead of just, straight-up violent fascism. They also removed mandatory minimums for first-time offenders. If the defendant didn't use any violence or possess a gun or a dangerous weapon during their crime, nobody was killed, no serious injury had resulted, the defendant wasn't a leader, an organizer, a manager, or supervisor of the others in the offense, then he didn't get a mandatory minimum. So you're, busted because you're, possessing marijuana and you're just by yourself and you're not, a dealer, then that's, c'est la vie, right? So you're not a mandatory minimum for first-time offenders. That seems actually crazy to me. So that's a good thing. Of course, we should remove mandatory minimums for first-time offenders. This is the first time you've been here? Well, we need to tell you this, right? It gets worse, and you need to take this serious but you shouldn't fuck somebody over the first time they make a mistake. So the bad things, I didn't like the assault weapons ban. I didn't like the funding, all the gun control. The 3 strikes, mandatory life sentences for repeat violent offenders. I don't really like that either, but I do because for rapists, yeah, you should go to jail forever. But a fist fight in Yellowstone Park, that's what Joe Biden was concerned about. So he was opposed to the 3 strikes, and he said so. But he agreed with the whole bill, right? So he said that there was more positive elements than negative elements in this bill. He wrote the damn thing. He's the one who willed and dealed. And then enabled juveniles to be tried as adults for violent and firearm-involved federal crimes. So the funding for prisons, he did enable juveniles to be adults. He did, assault weapons ban and, all the other stuff. So, he should back his bill, but ultimately it wasn't enough. It wasn't enough. So he, increased the death penalty for 60 crimes. I didn't even know the federal government was killing people. But now 60 crimes include the death penalty. And I heard drug dealers, I think major drug dealers get the death penalty according to the federal code. He passed $6 billion for prisons, or he was in favor of at least $6 billion. $10 billion is going to be in the final bill. So he's actually, he says that he argued for it, but he passed the thing. So he was in favor of the $10 billion for the prison constructions that was tied to the truth in sentencing laws, where they have to serve 85% of their sentence. So he lies. He says I wasn't for building more state prisons. I was against it. I wanted more rehab centers. You passed $10 billion for prisons. We kind of need prisons, so the fact that he's going to lie about it, he doesn't lie. He said he doesn't have a good reputation. He was sitting there shitting on the poor people and saying, hey, rich people, I love you, and he won't demonize the rich people. So he's essentially a Republican, but he was like, I got a bad reputation because I say what I mean and I mean what I say. Oh, yeah. Yeah, that's why you get a bad reputation. You got a bad reputation because you're not a progressive. You're a neoliberal, right-wing piece of shit. And, there's a lot of things. Your policy sucks and the way you treat people suck. So, you didn't... anyways, I didn't support more money to build state prisons. He did. He lied about that. And then the 11 states adopted it, so because of these laws, more people got tough on crime. They tried to pass the truth in sentencing laws so they could get the prison money, so they passed tougher laws in order to get more prisons. So yeah, they made all of America get tough on violent crime. And so, violent crime is bullshit. so it's hard to, really totally criticize. They're going to say that, it had a racial disparity and we have a lot of people in prison. Well, there's a lot of good things about that crime bill. So if the residual effects for those things, then we need to do something about that. Now we need to combat racism. Now we need to combat, the over-incarceration rates. So the author said, on their own, states passed 3-strike laws, enacted mandatory minimums, eliminated parole, reduced judicial discretion in sentencing. By dangling the money in front of people, the crime bill encouraged other states to get tough on crime. So, of course, right? So, fuck Joe Biden. He's a piece of shit on so many levels. He's wrong when it comes to the crime bill. He's wrong when it comes to prisons. So he could have ended the war on drugs. He could have reformed the police. He could have got rid of the blanket immunity, right? The police could get away with any crime that they want to. They got blanket immunity. And then universal health care. Universal health care, right? So people are getting violent. Maybe they should, get some mental health services. Body cameras for all the police. You could have passed a 21st century Bill of Rights. Legalized drugs. So civilian review boards, ending poverty, red flag laws. You could, there's some gun control I believe in. Review federal crimes subject to the death penalty. Remove mandatory minimums. Okay, so he could have done a lot more things. He could have done a lot more things. It wasn't, there's a lot of things in it that wasn't good. Some of it was good, and so yeah, that's Joe Biden on the 1994 crime bill.